a very special episode for you. We got a very special guest, somebody who has 28.8K Instagram followers. I could not find a TikTok. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I don't have a TikTok.
No TikTok, but these numbers don't tell the entire story. Matthew Duliba was one of the most important players on Love is Blind season 6, and I think is going to go down in history, the history of Love is Blind, as a recipient of one of the most heinous villain edits we have ever seen, maybe in the history of reality television, but certainly on an Olivia Caridi level. Thank you for being here with us today, Matthew.
Thank you both for having me on. Appreciate it.
So before we dive into the meat of what happened to you on Love is Blind season 6, we're just curious, did you watch reality TV before you came in? And if so, what shows did you normally watch? What was your kind of like understanding of reality TV?
I watched it enough to know that it was skeptical at best. But if I watched anything, Naked and Afraid was probably the show that I watched. I wasn't too familiar with a lot of the reality TV, and probably an error on my part in maybe not doing more research before I went into this experience. But I also didn't want to cloud the opportunity of being a part of the experience too. But it is what it is at this point.
Sure.
I think even if you know everything that's going on behind the scene, like we're well researched into production of reality TV, I would say. And even at that point, you can't, even if you think you know what you're getting into, I don't think you can know until you're actually experiencing it.
Yeah, I would have to say I agree with that.
You don't know what like lack of sleep, etc. is going to do.
Even knowing that, you still can't know how your edit's going to go. That you really can't know until it airs. But let me ask you this. I watched your interview with Chrissy Clark, and you said that you felt Love is Blind was closer to professional wrestling than it is reality. Are you a pro wrestling fan?
Actually, I am.
So do you then probably know what kayfabe is?
So is Chad.
What's that term?
Kayfabe?
I'm not familiar with that term. I watched it a lot as a kid, and I'll turn it on from time to time, but I'm not familiar with that term.
Kayfabe in pro wrestling is the idea that the wrestlers have to maintain the idea that this is all real. So when they're in the ring, they're in character, the outcomes of the matches are real, everything's real. That's kayfabe. And breaking kayfabe is when you come out and you say, this is not real. Like famously, Vince McMahon did it to usher in the Attitude Era back in the 90s. Do you think that you broke kayfabe at any point during Love is Blind season 6?
I don't think so. I mean, when I was in the experience, I was trying to be as authentic and as genuine as I could about why I was there. I mean, you saw the recent interview where, I did the experience completely alcohol free. And it's kind of like being the sober person at a drunk frat party. And not everybody was drinking to excess, but it's certainly very difficult to be in that type of experience while you're also being filmed and having first dates with women that you can't see and knowing you're going to be recorded and having all those different conversations where you're being vulnerable and talking about things like therapy and knowing that you're going to do that and potentially that everybody's going to see that. It's just very, very stressful. Something that I struggled with the first day. Incredibly nervous. And why wouldn't anybody be given the circumstances? But there's probably a reason why a lot of people drink on first dates is it makes it a heck of a lot easier. I wanted to go into with a clean, fresh mind about what I was doing there and my purpose. And I felt that I did it the best I could. And certainly the aftermath was not what I was expecting. But I still see it as a great opportunity to grow as a person and, state the truth about what happened so that more people can understand what's going on to potentially protect people that are part of these experiences moving forward, as well as some of the people that have been in these type of situations that haven't spoke up because they're afraid of intimidation by some of these people.
You're describing the drunk frat environment. I would say we get that kind of at the reunions of all the contestants, but I didn't get that vibe from the pods. Is everyone like drinking pretty heavily in the pods?
Some people are and some people aren't. And I think in the beginning stages, the way that everybody helped themselves with the nerves of the situation was to drink. And then it progressed the next 2 days. But I think a lot of people after the first few days started to understand more of the ramifications of what was happening and started to, step away from some of the alcohol. But if you saw, the vacation in the Dominican I don't think they were in the Dominican. I don't even actually know where they are. You could see that there was heavy drinking in that environment. I think they just didn't include a lot of it as part of the pods because they're probably trying to protect the integrity of their experiences they're showing it to people.
Mm-hmm. When you went in, you told producers that you were alcohol free. Did they try to get you to drink?
I did tell them I was alcohol free. It was something really important to me in my lifestyle and myself as a person. And yes, they did encourage me to drink.
Knowing that you don't drink.
Correct.
They were just like, come on, try one or two. I mean, how did they even approach that topic?
Well, it was like the second day, and the producer said something along the lines of like, well, hey, why don't you just have one or two drinks so that you can loosen up a little bit and maybe take the edge off of the situation. And those are the type of conversations that you're having with these people all the time. And I'm just constantly having to protect myself. Because like, I know these people do not obviously have my best interests in mind.
Yeah, that's wild.
At what point did you realize that?
When I was there for the first hour, and I think I talked about it in the other interview.
The first hour.
I went to go to the bathroom and somebody stopped me. They're like, you need to ask permission to use the restroom. I'm like, I got to ask permission to use the restroom? They're like, yes. And that to me, I'm like, oh, I'm into something far greater than I anticipated. You know, you don't have a cell phone, so you can't really call anybody. And I'm being threatened with lawsuits if I leave the show. And I was there for the right intentions. So I still, probably naive, thought that if I went about the experience the right way and did the right things and was respectful to everybody and the women, that, you know, they would have to show me in the light that in terms of which I showed myself.
Mm-hmm. Now, when you're talking about they're threatening to sue you if you leave the show, is that just the clause that's in the contract, or are producers verbally telling you, if you walk off this show, we will sue you?
Yes, I was told that in the first couple hours under there. It's like, hey, you can leave, but we'll probably most likely take legal action.
Oh my God. So if you get into a situation like this, and I mean, we cover The Bachelor too very extensively, and it's a very similar situation, even down to what you're talking about having to get permission to go to the bathroom and stuff. They do that on Bachelor as well. But the idea that they are on one hand saying, this show's about helping people find their soulmate and finding love. And then on the other hand, if you want to go about this in a slightly different way than they have scripted for you, they threaten to sue you. It's insane to me that they think that's an environment that fosters the ability to find these relationships. But it does. It does. Because there are plenty of people.
And you don't know if the person you're talking to behind the wall is being threatened also.
Yeah, I mean, that too.
Maybe they're trying to leave too.
But some people come into this experience and they do come out of it married and they're happy, and some of them are big influencers now and all of this. And so this happens at Bachelor as well. It splits the player pool into this divide of people who have gotten something very good out of it, and so they must maintain the party line that this is good and it works, and people who just get left behind, discarded as villains and fools and whatever. This is a question that I wanted to ask a little later, but we're here. Do you still keep in contact with any of the other players from your season, especially ones who maybe have also been maligned by them?
Yeah, I actually dog sit for a handful of the guys that were on the show, because I think the perception is that, you know, I didn't get along with any of the guys, or I didn't have, you know, strong relationships with them, or even some of the women. And that's not the case. But certainly as the oldest person there, and I'm living an alcohol-free lifestyle, going out to do Love is Blind, you know, parties and things like that, this is not the environment that I want to be in. So it feels a little bit like I'm an outcast because of my lifestyle, but I have nothing but good things to say about a lot of the people that are part of this. I'm supportive of anybody. I haven't said anything negative about anybody that's been a part of the experience. I'm supportive of AD and Amber and Sunny, even though there was things that were said and done that I was disappointed. But even still, I wish everybody the best. And I hope, as I'm telling my truth, that maybe more people will feel empowered to tell what the real story should be. And it's what's happening to people in their real lives in these environments. And it's not okay. And then when somebody potentially somewhere down the line hurts themselves, it's going to be a little footnote on the internet, and everybody's going to have the assumption that they're just a crazy person. And Hollywood has done this to people before, where, oh, he's just a crazy guy. So when I come out and tell my truth, it's going to be a lot harder for people to believe me, because they have this perception of who I am. And it's part of the reason why I waited so long and was trying to be really strategic about how I went about eventually telling my truth, because I didn't want to be talking about the drama that's associated with the show. I felt like some of that stuff is relatively immature. I wanted the truth of what I'm talking to about something that I think has real life effects on people.
Yeah. You seemed
No, it's scary, and like we've seen it. We've seen it in other franchises, you know, and um yeah, it's something that we feel very passionately about. Like we love reality TV, but we want it to be made in an ethical way. And and I think part of that is talking about these stories so that people actually know like this is a problem. We should take it seriously. It's not just like you know what you signed up for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know.
yeah.
I think they use the
You
contract to. Well, you signed up for this. You know, I think it's very fair for any employee that goes to work for an employer to have a fair representation of the environment for which they're going to work in, regardless of what that job is. And the environment
Mhm.
was not even closely disclosed to us and what it was going to be. Because if I would have known you can't use the restroom when you want to, they're going to be intentionally restricting your sunlight and fresh air to increase your psychological vulnerability, like all these different things. I knew what they were doing, so I'm essentially being abused and aware of it. And you really can't find a way out because you don't have a phone, you don't have your typical resources. And then again, there's women on the other side of the wall that I care deeply about that are in the same environment that I am in. So over
Mhm.
time, I was starting to become very protective. And if I left, I felt like I was kind of leading them to dry. So you're just like in constant conflict of
Mhm.
what decisions you should be making.
yeah.
Yeah, especially if you're the oldest cast member, the sober one who's like kind of giving the dad energy of the group. I think that's really nice that you felt protective, but it shouldn't be your job to do. Um, One of the things that I would say contributed most to your villain edit is the walkout. You seemingly walk out of this date without warning, and you have said that this didn't actually happen. Did you have any idea when you were shooting that they could possibly edit the footage to make it look like you walked out of a date that you didn't?
I mean, I knew that they had some editing control, so they could make things look a variety of different ways. And Sarah Ann even stated publicly that that never happened. But it's incredibly difficult to be seen as a villain for something that you didn't even do. And such an easy way
Mm-hmm.
to get people to hate you, or especially women, which is predominantly the people that watch these shows, to show a sign of disrespect. It's very difficult to overcome that. And I mean, that's just a snippet of where they're willing to go in terms of
Hmm.
tarnishing somebody's public reputation.
Yeah. If they identify you as that person, I mean, we talk about this in Bachelor a lot. They will, very usually in Bachelor, I'm sure Love is Blind is the same. From the first moment you're cast, they know exactly what role you're going to play. And you can go into that game and maybe surprise them and maybe they'll support you in some other narrative. But if they've built the idea you're going to be a villain, then you're going to be a villain, period. And they're going to do everything they can to make that true on screen. So when you were watching that moment specifically, when you're sitting back, you're doing your watch back and you see they cut it to make it look like you just walk out of that date. What is something like that? What does it feel like watching that?
Yeah, and I saw the clips on the social media off of
Hmm.
Netflix's, the 6 second clip with their little captions like, "Oh, that's not how you date" or something like that. As soon as I saw that, I knew I was in deep trouble because it
Yeah.
just started the
Mm.
barrage of, the online bullying and this guy's the worst ever. He's a serial killer. Like some of the worst things that you could potentially be called is what I was being called, and devastated.
Yeah.
I mean, you feel like you're suffocating, like there's just a thunderstorm over top of you, and you have no way out. But luckily, I have a girlfriend. She was with me at that time, and I called her and said, "You need to come here right away because I need you." And
Hmm.
she supported me through that, and I feel like I've come out the other side a better man and a stronger man. And part of what I'm doing is telling my truth, as well as trying to leverage what happened to me to be a resource and advocate for young people in terms of mental health, online bullying, all things that I think generationally older people don't really understand. Where I
Yeah.
have a
Yeah.
unique experience where I was probably bullied more than 99% of people will ever experience. And if I can use that to make some good, I see that's my only path forward.
Right.
So it's that clip, the promo where you first learn that they're gonna do you dirty. Did you end up watching the rest of the show?
Yeah, I did. I watched it, which
Yeah.
watching yourself is just such a weird thing, anyways. But I knew what was happening, so I
Yeah.
didn't really take. I have a different perception of what happened than probably a lot of people that watched it. Like I knew all that stuff was fake, so I mean, I kind of thought it was funny because I wouldn't take this stuff seriously anyways, and I hope people won't as much moving forward.
Yeah.
But I knew I was in
Mm-hmm.
trouble.
There's a moment in your season where you say something to the effect that you know America is going to be watching, and this is, in my opinion, this is breaking kayfabe because you're basically saying this is a reality show. We all know we're on TV here, and that this is to some
Breaking the
degree
fourth
going to be,
wall.
presented as a fake narrative. Were other players in the men's quarters and whenever you guys were kind of hanging out all together, were other players talking pretty openly about the fact that they knew it was a TV show, that they might get famous from it, or is that verboten? Do they never talk about that?
I think everybody talked about it a little bit, but I certainly was stressing to the guys, like, hey, be very careful what you say. They're going to be able to take
Yeah.
this any direction that they want. And the
Hmm.
producers yelled at me for kind of policing the language and the drinking.
Yeah.
Like, it's not your role. And I was trying, I mean, I
Mm.
generally was trying to help these guys because, Lizzie, like you said, I kind of felt like the dad of the experience. Like, hey,
Hmm.
I don't really want
Yeah.
these guys to get in a situation where they end up like I did. And it's kind of weird. I kind of glad it happened to me versus maybe one of them because I feel I'm pretty strong, from a mental health standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
But it almost broke me.
There's no protections, in scripted TV. All of the performers are paid, and they have certain times where you can do lunch breaks, and there's different resources to support people, and it really is still the Wild West in this arena, and the cycles kind of churn people out, so that it's like if people go through it once and have a bad experience, they mostly just like there's like, oh, whatever. But that's why I think it's brave to be, you know, not only living through the negative experience, but then standing up for yourself afterwards against a big media conglomeration. Like that's part of why it's so scary is it's like they can sue you. Like they have unlimited resources.
Yeah. It really comes down, I think, to like public perception. But there's a piece of this that you're mentioning here where you're kind of helping the other guys. You're saying, like, watch what you say, don't drink too much. Whereas the producers want the exact opposite. The producers want you to drink as much as possible and say the wildest shit you can imagine. So when they see you doing that, I imagine they very quickly identified you as a problem. And do you feel in any way that the edit you got and your treatment kind of from the franchise was retribution or punishment in any way for trying to like help these guys navigate the shark infested waters?
I think they produced what they thought would make them the most money and generate the most interest.
Mm,
So I think once they figured out that I ended up having multiple connections with two women that were best friends, and they were
mm,
pushing that
Mm-hmm.
manipulation storyline to Amber and AD, which they both told me after the fact that they were really like, "Hey, Matthew's saying the same things to you, or how do you feel about that? You should confront him." Uh,
right.
but I certainly think there was secondary benefits. They know who I am. It's basically like the Truman Show. They watched me for 8 days, all day, what I
Yeah.
was saying, how I was saying, how I was presenting myself. I'm in the pods talking about these people are abusing us. And I don't think anybody is really aware of what's happening. And so they're hearing me
Mm.
say these things. So I think they knew that I was eventually going to tell the truth, regardless of the way that they showed me. But my
Mm,
messaging is going to be a lot larger hill to climb once people
yeah.
saw me being the disrespectful villain. Like it's going to be a lot harder to believe this
Yeah.
guy because of what they've shown. And
Hmm. But it's like they
Yeah,
had.
you mentioned that they showed you saying the same things to Amber and AD, specifically that you were willing to leave the show with each of them. Do you think that they have this footage of everyone, other players saying things to multiple people and they can make that edit of anyone.
Yeah, I think showing a guy walking out on a girl and producing content where you're having similar conversations is the cards you could play at any scenario. I mean, I don't know how I'm supposed to
Yeah.
Yeah.
talk 30 hours with two separate women and somehow not have overlapping conversations or similar language in those conversations.
Yeah. I mean, anyone, if you recorded their dates, they would be
Right.
repeating a bunch of the same things, probably even jokes. I'll never forget they did on Bachelor in Paradise, this one guy, Thomas, they showed him like making a joke about how tall he was with every woman that he talked to. That was just what I
I
thought.
feel for him.
Yeah.
But like at some point, they have all this footage. They can cut it to look like whatever they want. That the walking out of the date edit to me is just one of the most egregious villain edits we've ever seen. They made a moment that never happened to specifically make you look bad. That's the only reason to put that edit in there. And to me, that is indicative of we don't like this guy. We're going to show him who's boss. Bachelor producers do that all the time. They seek some kind of punishment. Like if you come into our environment that we control and you're trying to exert some kind of control or even trying to protect yourself or other people, we're going to make you look terrible. And they know what's going to happen as a result of that. These producers are not ignorant to the fact that what we call the fourth audience, who are the people at home watching these shows, they mostly, I think, will believe that this is real. And the producers know that if they air that, the person on the other end of this is just going to get a tidal wave of, like you're saying, death threats, negative emails, and they're not responsible because of that contract. They're indemnified against anything that you could say or do. So in that moment, when you're seeing that piece of the edit, or even your whole season, are there specific producers that come to mind to you who might have been behind this? Were there ones that were like nicer to you than others? Or are there ones you more readily suspect having maybe been at the behind the wheel of creating this edit?
Well, I would assume the producer that I was assigned to is the one that probably creates the story. And
Yeah.
this individual would ask me 15 to 20 times, do you trust me? Do you trust me? It's just like the greatest form of manipulation and psychological abuse that I've ever seen. I mean, I was lied to
Oh,
more
wow.
7, 8 days and probably collectively my entire life. And then you have different people a part of the process that are treating you differently, all
Hmm.
trying to mess with you in some aspect. So
Yeah.
it
Yeah,
was
I mean, they
incredibly
have to
difficult.
coordinate.
Yeah. And if it's anything like Bachelor, all those producers, whether it's the one assigned to you or not, and that's the way Bachelor works as well, they assign one or two producers to every person. All those producers, though, show wide are in a big group thread, like a WhatsApp thread with each other, just saying like, "Oh, we got him to say this in an ITM," or I don't know what they call it on Love Is Blind, but ITMs are in the moment when you're kind of direct addressing the camera, and there's a producer sitting next to it asking you questions or asking you if you trust them, whatever the case may be. So all those producers are coordinating. We have this information from this person. We have this footage from this person. How can we cut this together? Oh, we need get this person to say this. That will cut good going this way or whatever. So they're already kind of like building edits as they're producing you as well.
I was I was wondering, you're getting all of these death threats, um, hate on social media. In what other ways did this experience affect your life?
I had some pretty significant social anxiety for about a month and a half, where I felt uncomfortable going into public because I just assumed that women would like walk up and throw water in my face, even though that wasn't the case. Like a couple of times that I went out, everybody was really pleasant and nice to me.
Wow.
But
Scared to go in public.
yeah, and also like even some of my friends, our relationship changed a little bit for a while because they all had really high expectations that I would be shown to the true form of who I am as a person. And when they got to see something else, I'm sure there's like a little bit of frustration, like, why did you do that? And like those relationships even changed too. Like people that I've known for years. It's like, well, of course I didn't do that. Do you think I would really walk out on a girl while they're filming me? But that was probably the hardest. Just people that you had existing relationships, you feel like their perception
Mhm.
has changed of you, even though you had years or decades of experiences with them.
Yeah. That thing that you're talking about, like, do you really think I would walk out on a date? To me, that was kind of like, in terms of the narrative they were building about you, that was the most contradictory piece of it. And the piece that made me realize, like, oh, this is all completely fabricated. Because you're saying, on one hand, they're shooting us. America's watching this. But then on the other hand, you're doing this bombastic stuff like walking out on a date. It's like he knows that this is reality TV. Why would he ever do that? It made no sense.
Yeah.
And to me, your villain edit was one of the sloppiest villain edits I've ever seen in any reality show. It just did not hold water from very early on. And so that's why I think it was like retribution, partially, because they did it so poorly. It didn't look like it was contrived as they were producing. It looked like it was put together after they had all the footage, and they were just like, let's make this guy look as bad as possible because he kind of ruined the first few days of our setup or whatever. But I guess my question in all of that is, you never knew that it was going downhill. You had some suspicion because they were, telling you can't go to the bathroom, or we're going to sue you. They're saying these kinds of negative things. Were you asking anybody else at that time, any of the other guys, hey guys, are they threatening to sue you? Are they threatening to give you a villain edit?
I mean, I didn't really talk a ton to the guys about what was happening, just because I didn't trust anybody. And why would I? So I never talked to anybody about the women I was dating or a lot of things that were happening. I think a little bit over time, yes, but I'm also being filmed as I'm potentially trying to even have these conversations with the guys. So why would I even talk about it even more when I know that they're watching and hearing me? But yeah, I mean, I think some of the guys overheard, even one of the producers, we all saying like, well, who do you think the villain is? And one of the gentlemen pointed right at me. He's like, there's your villain. They're going to love to hate you.
Oh, shit.
And like,
oh my God.
Oh God.
So I was threatened multiple times. Like, if you don't do what we ask you to do or play the game, we're going to make you the villain. So as things are happening, I essentially know I have two doors I can walk through. Like, I can do it their way. I can get engaged to AD, probably get married, and I'm probably going to get the fame and the fortune. I'm aware. I work in finance. I know how much money is potentially on the line and the following that would come with it. Or door number two is I can do what I think is right and stand up for the truth and still walk away with my integrity, and knowing most likely that I'm going to be hated by potentially millions of people because they're going to show me as somebody that I'm not. It was a very difficult decision, but it's interesting when you're in that moment, and it's like you got the devil on one side and you got your angel on the other. Like, what are you going to pick? And I'm proud of myself for the way I handled it the whole way through, because even dealing with the villain card and staying quiet for months, I mean, that wasn't easy. I mean, I know the truth about a lot of these things that I'll probably take to my grave, because I don't really want to get involved with the drama of the situation and undercut people. I don't think that's the purpose of the story.
You did not come to the reunion. Did you watch the reunion?
I did.
What did you think about how they handled the Trevor Sova, like essentially making him answer for coming into the game with a serious relationship and coming on the show for clout?
I'm not surprised they did it, but I think it's embarrassing that Nick Lachey would sit there, put all those people up front, and make some righteous statement about how they have such high integrity and that the experience shouldn't be used for fame or fortune, and that this is truly about communication and love, while knowing that I was probably one of the most genuine people there in terms of why, and they completely destroyed me and my public reputation on a whole bunch of lies. So, but that's what a lot of powerful people will do.
Yeah.
I remember watching.
Also, to say that like this isn't about clout, I'm like, how are you casting your seasons though? Like what? Like what planet are we on? There are people who become super famous from the show every season. That's just a fact.
I remember watching that reunion, and in that exact moment, just having to like pause it, and I did like a 10-minute diatribe on my video reaction to it that was just like, this is insane. This guy who is a famous host of this show is saying it's not about fame. Meanwhile, they have literally the most famous alumni from the show are sitting in the audience, like clapping and cheering everybody on. And then the reason they brought Trevor on is because they had already shot Perfect Match season 2 that he's in. So I felt so bad for him. Like, say what you will about coming into the game for ulterior motives. I don't personally have any problem with it. To me, it is a game that you can, if you want to, you can play it to find fame, or you can play it to find love, or anything in between. But when they brought him out, I'm sure he was like, you know what? This is going to be great. I'm going to come out. I'm going to promote Perfect Match Season 2. Everything's going to be awesome. Then he sits down and they're like, so you have to answer for your sins. This is like you're saying, it's just so self-righteous. To me, that was a step too far. But the question I have in all of this is the audience that watches this show, you have seen firsthand their reaction to your villain edit, which we know is all created. How much of the audience do you believe thinks all of this is real?
A lot, unfortunately. And I don't know if they think, I think majority of it is real. I think that's a perception. Like, hey, yeah, there's some editing, but Matthew is probably just a really bad guy. My intuition tells me that he is who they say he is. And
right.
I mean, there's a reason why they did it. I mean, to their credit, it did work. It's one of the most watched episodes of all time of the series. So, I mean, I get it, but the ramifications of that are significant for me. And
totally,
I'll never be able to totally get out from under it. But once again, I'm not going to play victim the rest of my life. I feel like I've moved forward and I'm ready to have these type of conversations without coming across as a, victim and depressed and sad. And I'm moving forward and trying to take my experiences and do some good with it.
Yeah. Let me ask you this. Would you have rather been edited out of the show completely?
I thought I was going to be. That's why I didn't get engaged. The whole thought process is that, like, hey, I can go do this experience, and if it doesn't feel right, I don't have to cross that threshold. I won't get engaged, and most likely I won't even be on the show. And I was perfectly fine with that. Where everybody else is like, well, I got to be on the show. That's why I'm here. That's why you get all these people that get engaged without ever seeing somebody. But I don't try to live too far in regret. Like, there has to be a purpose and a reason. And maybe in 7 to 10 years, I'll look back as this is a really pivotal moment for me as a person. And if I can have 1 or 2 people reach out to me and hear my story, and maybe it can help them, and hopefully more over the course of time, then I think I can look back at it and be like, hey, I'm glad it happened.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting.
Or have you been following the Jeremy Hartwell lawsuit that he settled with Netflix and Kinetic for $1.4 million?
No, I'm not really much of a social media person.
Jeremy Hartwell was a guy who was on season 2 of Love is Blind. He has co-founded an organization called UCAN with Nick Thompson, another guy who was on season 2 of Love is Blind. And that foundation helps people do basically exactly what you're saying. Helps people like with kind of what's going to happen to their life after they go on reality TV and the bullying and the harassment.
Mental health support.
Yeah, all of that. And Hartwell also filed a lawsuit against Netflix and Kinetic because they claimed him and everybody from season 2 as employees on their tax forms, but they're telling all the players you're independent contractors so that you don't get any benefits, you don't get anything like that. And so he successfully sued and got a class action lawsuit settlement for $1.4 million, which I think gets spread out amongst all the cast from season 2 and maybe the crew as well. But in my opinion, it's kind of a significant moment where something's going to have to change, at least in the way the contracts are written in terms of, are you an independent contractor, an employee, whatever. But some of that, I think, hopefully will bleed over into just how the contract is written, because I'm sure you read your contract, at least now, if you didn't read it when you signed it. There are so many clauses in it that essentially say we can do whatever we want, cut your footage any way we want, we can disparage you, make you look terrible, and you can do nothing. Did you think that type of language, those types of clauses that are in all reality TV contracts, it's not just Love is Blind, do you think that's necessary to actually make good programming?
No, I don't think it's necessary. Especially if the purpose of the show is like Nick Lachey says in the reunion. If the purpose of the show is about love and connection and relationships, then why do you need to push false narratives and ruin people's lives? Because eventually these stories are going to happen. And eventually it's going to have to stop, because if somebody does hurt themselves or commit suicide, I mean, it's very likely that somebody in the next 5 years is going to commit suicide that's being part of these experiences. And that scares me, because if I don't say anything and it happens, I'm going to feel a little bit responsible because maybe I could have said something and did something to
Mm.
make somebody who isn't ready to say their truth because they're intimidated by the power of these people.
Hmm.
You know, I don't think I could live with myself. And if they sue me and I lose millions of dollars, I mean, it's just money. It's not that important. But I have no intention in taking any legal action against them. I'm
Sure.
interested more in moving forward in my life and trying to once again take this experience and be an advocate and support for people that maybe had similar ones like myself.
Yeah. I totally agree with you. I mean, that exact thing has already happened to the Bachelor franchise, and they just kept on going, didn't slow them down a
Mm.
bit. But I agree with you. I think it's
Same with
gotten,
Love Island.
yeah, Love Island. There have been multiple kind of things in various reality TV formats where stuff like that has happened. But I think it's getting worse because of social media. The
Mm-hmm.
ability for the audience to now contact directly any of these people, it's at a level that it's never been at, and it's only increasing. So I think that you're probably right about that. But I personally think the producers, there's still this kind of old school reality TV mentality amongst many of the producers on these new shows, and that comes from like the Jenny Jones, Jerry Springer era, where it's like we want to see people fighting on TV and screaming at each other and looking terrible, and that
Mm-hmm.
idea that the performers, the reality performers, are just targets or assets that can be used to create this one season of television, then discarded if they no longer serve the function of promoting whatever the show is. So, like you saw in the reunion, they bring back all their successful, in quotes, successful couples. This is the royalty of Love is Blind, and we love them, and we're going to put them in the front row, but everybody else, we don't care. And I just think that's a bad way to do business. But all of that said, do you think that there should be a union for reality performers like there are for actors and writers and directors?
Yeah, if the employers aren't going to protect the employees, then we have to protect ourselves.
Right.
Simple as that.
What do you think a union might look like that? Do you think it's part of SAG? Do you think it's its own thing?
I wouldn't even have any idea. Just to me, it's about the environment of the workplace. I think
Yeah.
those are some very easy solutions that every employer should be mandated to have a fair representation of what that workplace culture is like. And that happens not just in reality TV, that happens across our society as a whole, where you quit one job, go to another one, they tell you you're going to work from home 5 days a week, and next thing you know, they want you to come in there for 5 days. Like, that's not right.
Mm-hmm.
Should be some laws that protect us when we're employees going to work for employers.
Hmm.
Yeah. I think that as a society, we are recognizing more different types of things as work. Because I have talked to people about this issue who don't really know much about it. And they're like, what? Why should they get paid? They're getting famous, whatever. And I'm like, no, but you're doing work. You're making them a shit ton of
Mm-hmm.
money. You should have protections, in my opinion. Would you ever do another reality show?
Probably not. If I would do anything,
Probably
it would
not.
be it would
I
be
guess that.
naked and afraid without the naked part. But um,
Just afraid.
yeah, I just like I don't know if
It's called
anybody. I
Alone.
don't. Oh yeah, I don't know if anybody wants to watch me hang out in the woods for 7 days, but I'd be willing to do that. I'm
Yeah.
actually a country boy and I'm a hunter and fisher, so like I really enjoy that stuff, and I would love that challenge. But I mean, I'm probably done with that aspect of my life. I would never even thought in a million years that I would do something like this.
Yeah.
But you get offered the
How did they
opportunity.
find
Yeah,
you?
somebody from my college reached out to me, and I wasn't going to do it. I never had any intention. And then once they
Hmm.
offered it to me, a lot of my friends and family were like, "Hey, it's an actually wholesome show. Like, there's good things that happen here, and
Oh
some of the
no.
people that get shown bad, they're probably just bad people, or showing themselves." So,
Yeah.
and I watched the first season. I watched the first couple episodes. I'm like, well, that's not that bad. I think I could do that and be a genuine person. Probably come across okay. But certainly when I got there and I was just saw what was happening, what the way people were acting, what was being said.
Mhm.
I mean, these people just have no remorse. It's the only time in my life I've ever been in an environment where other humans were looking at me and I wasn't a human anymore. I was just some object that they
Mm.
were going to potentially leverage any way that they saw fit. And if I
Mhm.
had some mental issues or committed suicide at some point, I think they would see it as a loose end that's closed.
Oh, wow. Let me ask you this. In service of, I guess, these production companies being more transparent about how these shows are made and what the eventual outcomes might be if you walk away from this having had a negative experience, what do you think they could do to actually prepare somebody coming into this, to give them a clear idea of, like, this is exactly what this is, sign the contract or not, but we're going to tell you exactly what you could expect? What could they even do to show you that?
Why not have people that have already done the experience as part of the application process to talk to your people that are looking to do it?
Yeah, that's interesting.
But I mean,
And both obviously positive and negative.
yeah,
Because if they did that, it would be Lauren Speed and Cameron Hamilton being like, it's great. You're going to get married and get 1 million Instagram followers.
yeah.
Well, isn't there someone who became a casting producer from the show?
Yeah, it was Chelsea, I think, from
Yeah.
season 5, I want to say, or season 4. But again, they champion her because she is in a relationship with Kwame. And so it's like everything's great there. And now she gets to be a part of this thing and they celebrate that. It's like I don't think they would ever have the people that they give villain edits to come out and be like, well, there is a dark side to this story as well. But I mean, that's kind of what I'm getting at. Like, I agree with you. I think, we have something in Bachelor that we call Sluician Protocol because this one player named Hannah Sluss famously in season 24 said, we know what we signed up for. And so we call that Sluician Protocol. And it kind of is a catch-all, I think, for the opposite argument of the fact that, like, villain edits or whatever. It's like, well, you know what you signed up for. And in many cases, like you're saying, you don't. How you get to a point where producers really can lay out what are you signing up for, I don't know what that looks like. Is it just a matter of talking to the old players, including the people who had bad edits? And why would they ever even do that,
I think a disclaimer is also something that should be put on these shows. Like, why not let the audience know that some of this is edited for your viewing pleasure and entertainment, and do not take what you see as factual evidence of who these people are. Separate it.
That's
I
interesting.
think that would be a really good thing to put at the beginning of every episode.
I agree. I think that's a great idea.
Title card.
I mean, bring it back to pro wrestling. That is kind of what Vince McMahon did at the beginning of the Attitude Era, and it exploded pro wrestling into its most popular era of all time. When the company that made the media came out and said, look, this isn't real, but we're going to entertain you. And that's what you should view this as. It allowed them to go in all kinds of crazy directions. You had, like, Undertaker coming out as a character who's literally a zombie wrestling people in the ring, and you're like, yeah, whatever, I'll go with it. This is hilarious, or whatever, And I think maybe
And
they
people aren't sending the zombie death threats.
He's already dead. He can't be killed.
He's already
He's
dead.
the man who can't die. But no, I agree with you. I think that's a great idea. I think the problem that the production companies would have with it is they believe, and I think mistakenly so, they believe that the shows are only popular because people think it is real. And that if you somehow draw that back a little bit, the audience won't be there with you. But I just don't think
Or
it
not
matters.
think the relationships are real.
Yeah,
The
exactly.
love stories.
But it's like people are getting married. How much more real is that? They're like
Yeah.
Lawrence Speed and Cameron Hamilton.
There's
They've been together
children.
for 5 or 6 years or something. They're kids. Yeah, exactly. I don't know. I think that's a great idea, though, the disclaimer.
Yeah, I do too. It's now been some time since Love is Blind season 6 ended. Do you feel like your life is getting back to normal somewhat?
I don't know if it'll ever be normal after going through that, but mental health wise, I'm in a much better place, and I'm excited about the future and what I'm, doing moving forward. And some of this stuff is important for me personally too, to be able to tell my truth. This is what happened. You should be aware of what's happening. And I know the microphone I have is a small pebble in the ocean in comparison to, going on the reunion and doing those things. But it was never about that. It was about letting people know that this is a real thing and people are really going to get hurt. And it scares the heck out of me that somebody that I did this experience with could really hurt themselves. And if I didn't say anything, I would have to live with that for the rest of my life. And if I do have regrets in my life, oftentimes it's not for things that I did. It's the things that I didn't do. Call a friend when they're having a rough time in their life, or, say hello to a stranger who looks like they're just having a bad day. Like, you can really have some positive impact on people in just the slightest of ways. And as awkward as all this is and ridiculous the whole thing is, I just feel that this is the best way for me to handle this.
I would understand if you didn't want to do any of this, no interviews, just leave it all behind. So yeah, I appreciate that you are telling this story.
Yeah, absolutely.
Definitely can feel like a David and Goliath situation with these big corporations.
Yeah. For what it's worth, I do think that we're starting to hit a turning point in this because of people like you coming out and talking about your personal experiences going through these different reality shows and stuff. I do think that we're going to start to see a change in that direction. And obviously, are you falling into the other lawsuits that are against Love is Blind right now?
I know there's several out there, but I really try to separate myself from this as much as possible just because of how hard it was.
Yeah.
So even like being on Instagram at all, I can't do it just for the amount of negative and mean comments. It's just, it can start to send you in a place that you don't need to be in. So a lot of this stuff, I'm completely clueless. Like my friends are like, "Oh, did you see your meme on Spence? You see your meme on Sports Center?" I'm like, "No, I didn't see that, but that's fantastic." Like horrible.
Yeah, that's great. Unintended benefit. Well, just to catch you up to speed, there are 2 lawsuits that are currently pending against Kinetic and Netflix. One from Renee Poche and one from Tran Dang. Both were women in the last season. Were they on your season? No, they were season 5, I think. Anyway, they're suing for wrongful imprisonment, being put in an environment. Renee Poche specifically says the guy she wound up with was not nice to her, we'll say, and had a gun, all this kind of stuff. And that the producers were basically like, no, just go in, talk to him, work it out. And she was like, no, I don't think so. So there are all these kind of lawsuits basically against the producing practices, saying that they are doing these bad things. And even if those lawsuits aren't won by the players, the idea of that is now very much out there. And I think Love is Blind, I don't know any other reality show that has this many lawsuits against it. So I think it is kind of being positioned as a show that's like maybe the most nefarious in terms of producing practices. But
and they're now suing Renee Poche for $4 million.
Yeah, they're countersuing her. So I don't know. We'll see how all that stuff shakes out. But we can't thank you enough again for like adding to this story of how these shows are made and the fact that maybe they don't need to be made like this, and we could still get a good. I mean, if we're really watching it for the love story, like Nick Lachey says, like why isn't that the whole show?
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
It just doesn't make sense. At any rate, man, thank you so much for being with us today. Where can people follow you if you want more followers?
If you want it.
Yeah, my Instagram handle's my full name, so Matthew Duliba _ and my website is MatthewDuliba.com, where I'm putting myself out there to be an advocate or a mentor for other people dealing with mental health issues, whether it's cyber or online bullying or people interested in living an alcohol-free lifestyle or a healthier lifestyle. So if I have several people that reach out to me, I'll certainly make sure that we have those conversations. I'll do whatever I can to help.
I think it's awesome that you are offering that support, since it's I don't know. I'm sorry that you went through this. And like we have, a small, certainly a smaller platform than Love is Blind, but we've gotten, some online hate, and I could not handle just the tiny amount. So I can't even imagine.
Yeah, it wasn't easy, but
on that scale.
Luckily, I'm a pretty disciplined person, which AD was one of the reasons why we probably wouldn't be a great fit, which is not the worst thing for a woman to call you, but I really do think that my process of how I go about my life, accomplishing the smallest tasks each day and trying to keep the focus on just growing as a person and try to get a little bit better, all those things have helped me through this process. And if I didn't have that, if I wasn't living an alcohol-free lifestyle, I would be very worried about the current place that I'm in, because alcohol is used a lot of times to suppress your feelings and your stress. And
sure,
I do worry about some of my cast members and their substance abuse potentially is regarding this, because you are now the face of something where people are being abused and you're profiting from it. And that's just not something that I was ever going to have be a part of my story as a person. If I'm 80 years old and I'm looking back at my life, yeah, you could have millions of dollars and following all these people would have thought you were the coolest person in the world. But deep down inside, you would have known that you were covering up for human abuse. And it's just not something that I was willing to do. and I knew this path was going to be significantly harder, but I'm not going to stop.
Fantastic, man.
I think that's great.
I mean, yeah, like we've said this
I
whole
hope
time.
when you're looking back on this at 80, you'll be like, wow, that it pivoted my life in a direction, but you made the most out of it and like stuck to who you are, which is very hard to do in these types of situations.
Yeah, but thank you so much again for joining us. We really can't say enough good things about the importance of these kinds of conversations, shedding light on how these shows are made, especially the negative aspects of it. Because again, if people come out of this and all we're really focused on is like the good stories, the big stars that come out of the shows, I think it gets lost in the shuffle that can, in many cases, come at the cost of people like you, Matthew, who just get kind of chewed up and spit out by the grinder. But again, thank you so much for coming on. And everybody out there, follow Matthew and say nice things to him. Don't say anything mean.
Well, hey, I just really appreciated your time and the opportunity to come on your show, and it means a lot. So thank you both very much.
Please rate this podcast. Please review this podcast. Please get a friend to listen to us, and then please rate this podcast. Please review this podcast. Please get a friend to listen to us, and then please rate this podcast. Please review this podcast. Please get a friend to listen to us, and then